I think it's time to have a look at what's been going on in Poland because, oh boy, um, things have been getting quite interesting. Now, for those of you who don't know, of course, we all remember recently the great victory of Donald Tusk and the alliance of left and left centre parties to oust the Peace and Justice Party. And remember, Poland has been under the rule of the Peace and Justice Party for at least a decade. This was like the first, like, right populist party to sort of actually take power. And their whole pitch was, don't worry, guys, we're the real conservatives. You can trust us. And of course, they started doing all kinds of bizarre, weird shenanigans. We talked about very recently about how they went after the media and tried to make the media sort of pro like peace and justice. And as soon as Donald Tusk came in, he went, "Oh no, that ain't happening now," and he's undone that. And Poland right now is going through this transition phase where you've had this alt-right party in power where they've done a lot of damage, and Donald Tusk and the rest of the coalition are now fighting back to undo this damage that has been done to Poland's democracy. So don't get me wrong, this probably won't be the last time we have a look on what's been going on in Poland, but this story is insane. This whole idea that two ministers of the previous administration, when running to the palace to try and get presidential pardons, is absolutely and utterly bizarre. But it goes to show you that when you finally remove these right-wing populists, when the public actually goes, hold on, yeah, these guys were just complete idiots, they really didn't have any clue what they were doing, turns out you've got a lot of work to do to try and restore the democracy and, of course, undo the damage that these right-wing populists had done. So we're going to have a look at this today because I think this is really, really important to have a look at. And to be honest, it is a story that you have to hear to believe, to be honest. But before we do get into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And of course, there is the one-off donation link where you can help support the channel with the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the Pony Club as well. You can join as well to help support the channel too. So, as always, thank you very much to everyone who does help support the channel that way. Like I say, you can always help the channel out by clicking the like and share button. And now, on with today's story. So, like I say, strap yourselves in because this is a wild, wild ride. So, this comes from The Guardian with the title of Poland's right-wing populists are getting a taste of their own medicine and they hate it. From the outside, Poland may seem to be in turmoil. Its democracy is at risk of being derailed by a palace farce, a right-wing fightback, or both. Two fugitive politicians who served as ministers in the recently ousted right-wing government were arrested earlier this month after trying to seek refuge at the presidential palace. The president, Andrzej Duda, then thought that he could try and grant them asylum. But as it turned out, his personal security detachment was not loyal to him, but to the new government, and facilitated the arrest warrant. The former ministers then went to prison, but after a fortnight of a standoff, the president this week granted them a pardon. So just imagine that. Just imagine that for a second, that this has happened. That again, of course, Poland's system is different, but imagine this for a second that, I don't know, two conservative ministers fled to, I don't know, Jacob Rees-Mogg's manor down in Somerset and were demanding to to grant him asylum, and that somehow or another Boris Johnson managed to magic up a pardon and get these people off for you know this would be an absolute insane story if this happened over here. But the fact that it's going on in Poland is directly because you have had this far right populist government that has run roughshod over the rule of law for years. And now, as the title of it said, they are now getting their comeuppance and they do not like it. So, back to it. So, why couldn't he have done it sooner? Well, that's a long story. To understand this extraordinary episode, even in which the Prime Minister Donald Tusk described it as unbelievable, we first need to understand how the new and old political camps are using the rule of law as they tussle for control. On one side is the new government, led by Tusk, the leader of the Liberal left coalition that emerged victorious in the parliamentary election last October. On the other side is the opposition, the Nationalist Law and Justice Party, called Peace, which ran the country for the previous 8 years and has shaped its laws and institutions to fit its personal populist right-wing agenda. The political transformation was always going to be very bumpy. Law and justice leaders had to cede power to Tusk after failing to form a government. But they expected to hold on to some of it after all. They still had an opposition loyalist in the president at least until the mid 2025. They, of course, miscalculated. To put it mildly, Jalso Kalskarski, the peace leader, was also used to getting his way. Despite his wafer-thin majority, he governed Poland with an iron fist. There were, of course, constitutional and judicial constraints. Polish highest courts resisted Karski at times, but he then found his way around them. The rulings of the Constitutional Tribunal became law only when published by the official government register. So, if you control the government, you can simply refuse to publish the verdict, and presto. This simple trick allowed Krevsky to absolutely eviscerate the high courts. So, as you can see, this is unbelievable. The just simple idea that if the High Court rules against you, well, we're not going to publish that ruling. We're just going to completely ignore it. The High Court did what you say? Well, never heard of it. So you can just see the amount of stuff they have been getting away with, as was said, for the past 8 years, almost a decade at this point, that they have been getting away with and still try to get away with. But like I say, the story is about to get really stranger. So, the presidential authority in Poland is mostly ceremonial. The office is referred to as the guardian of the chandelier, due to the namesake element of decor in the grand ballroom of the presidential palace. The Polish president has constitutional power of veto, but Dura was not a problem for PSI as he rarely exercised his powers. The constitution also gives the president the right to pardon sentenced offenders, and Dura is trying to use his prerogative to provide immunity to right-wing politicians and pundits who now find themselves on the wrong side of history. This is where, as you can see, it's about to get very fun. Two PSI politicians, Marcel Kalmskas and Marcel I'm not even going to try and pronounce that, were convicted of abuse of power back in 2015. And last month, they were sentenced to 2-year jail terms. They refused to comply on the grounds that Dura had already issued them a preemptive presidential pardon. But the president is not a king, and with the royal prerogative of pardoning now a prisoner in advance of their sentencing. They had claimed, ludicrously, to be Poland's newest political prisoners. In fact, The story of their conviction dates back to 2007, when Korska needed the backing of the ultra-populist agrarian movement leader Andrzej Lepa to form a coalition, and Kerensky openly despised Lepa. But he had to give the former pig farmer and Ministry of Agriculture the title of Deputy Prime Minister in exchange for votes, and he frequently expressed his contempt at making the most exotic coalition in Polish history. And members of that very same cabinet had the habit of insulting each other in public. Just so what? Just you. This is the thing. You know, as I said, I follow British politics. I don't follow other countries' politics that closely. It's only when stuff like this gets published in our newspapers do we get to see what is happening in other countries. But my word, it's it's just so strange. So anyway, as tensions between Kowalski and Lepa became apparently unreconcilable, Ralska and Kaminsky, the officials formed the new anti-corruption agency at the time and concocted a plan of creating a fake real estate deal. The anti-corruption agency's investigation led to become what was known as the land scandal and the sacking of Lepa. But the two politicians were later charged with a range of offenses and in 2015 were found guilty of abuses of power. So just imagine that for a second. They go, right, we need to get rid of this guy because he is absolutely not, shall we say, being kosher with the rest of us. So we need to get rid of him. So we're going to come up with a new anti-corruption agency and we're going to concoct some fake real estate deal to get rid of him. Then this gets found out, and yet, as we said, because they were players in the right-wing populist party, didn't get touched. And now justice is finally long coming after them. So, as long as Piss was in power, Wolski and Kromsky were untouchable. The Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that Dura's pardon was unconstitutional and not legally binding. But Piss simply any others. You see just how insane this becomes. That if you have this party and you're in with the party, you can do almost no wrong. And this is a feature of every single right-wing government, right-wing party that is out there in Europe. They believe that once they are in power, they can just ride completely roughshod over the rule of law, over the democracy, because after all, they're in power. But eventually, there may come a time where they're not in power anymore. And of course, as is happening here in Poland, the law finally catches up to you. So, even today, Dura is now pretending that his unlawful pardon never happened. He tried the farcical palace hideout scheme to try and protect the pair. When that failed, he tried to blow the whistle internationally, calling for the EU, NATO, and even the World Economic Forum in Davos to liberate the political prisoners in Poland, eliciting nothing but raised eyebrows. What? Why would you go to NATO? What? Like, why would you go to NATO? NATO has no skin in the game in this. Even the World Economic Forum in Davos, like, why would you go there? Probably just to get attention. But the only one I could reasonably see was probably like the EU, but even they would be like, well, your pardon was deemed illegal. Your court said it was so. If you brought it up to us, we would probably confirm what the court would say. Anyway, Dula and Krensky look like class bullies who have now finally been punched back and just don't know what to do. Tusk's new coalition is, meanwhile, trying to provide creative in the funding loopholes in the legal straitjacket created for it by the previous regime. It cannot fire the management of the Polish state radio and TV. But it can use stations uh, in receivership in the interim of the administration, can do as it pleases. And the new prosecutor general cannot change his own deputy without presidential approval. He can obviously nominate an acting deputy as a temporary caretaker. So you just go to see that even though they are out of power, they have put stuff in place to try and, well, if we do lose an election, then we need to make sure that we can provide stumbling blocks, loopholes, stuff that if they do decide to come out of us, we can use to sort of protect ourselves. Again, another feature of many of these right-wing parties, what they do when they get in power. As dubious as some of these workarounds now may seem, they are legally binding until and otherwise found by a court of law. The opposition is now crying foul and claiming to be worried about the rule of law. But PiS used its very same strategy for effectively over 8 years, and it now finds itself on the receiving end. The new government is also picking fights wisely. Warski and Kaminsky were never popular with public opinion. Ditto to the right-wing pundits in the state-owned media and the PSI-appointed public prosecutors. They are now all very well ousted from their well-paid jobs, and the majority applauds it. In a recent poll, 56% of respondents claimed to be very satisfied by the recent actions of the government against the 37 who were dissatisfied. So far, nothing indicates this tendency will change before the local elections in April. And so long as the opinion polls are in favor of the government, Tusk has very little incentive to change course. The right-wing opposition cannot do much to stop him. The most it can do is just stage protests and be loud and spectacular, but they are just futile nevertheless. Just like the protests that the liberal left opposition spent 8 years staging. The system is now designed to ensure that it is fairly easy to form a government and nearly impossible to topple it. For good or for ill, Polish politics is decided by the ballot box. Yeah. Wow. You honestly can't believe this stuff when you read it about what's been going on in Poland, but this is currently the norm. This is what Donald Tusk is having to do. He's having to undo over at least 8 years of rule by the Peace and Justice Party because they did the exact same things and now they're getting a taste of the medicine. But Tusk is doing it to try and say, hey, look, we want to sort of restore rule of law, but you've put all these stumbling blocks in the place where we can't do much about it. So we're going to use the exact same tactics as you to get around these things and go after all these guys who have broken the rule of law. It's unbelievable, but this is what Poland has to do to try and undo so much of the damage that they had done in the past 8 years. Might seem unbelievable, but that is where we are. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and do let me know in Poland what you think of this, or if there's anything else that goes on like this. I would love to hear about it. So please do let me know. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.